I'm not going to beat around the bush, Michael. You're a smart man, and I can see that you consider yourself a straightforward person. So I'll be frank with you, said my wife's boss, sipping expensive scotch after our wives had left the table to powder their noses. I stared at this man. I didn't like him very much. He seemed arrogant, smug, and boastful. He was dressed in a bright Italian suit that I could never afford on my salary as an investigative reporter for a local newspaper. I didn't know what he meant, but I was curious, so I let him continue. There was a smirk on his face that seemed to say, "I'm better than you, and I know things you don't." "Okay," I said, taking my hand out of my pants pocket to take a sip of my much cheaper bourbon. "Lay it on me." The smirk became even more smug. I hadn't wanted to hit anyone in years. The smirk on his face quickly replaced everything else on my list of things I wanted to do at that moment. "I'm going to sleep with your wife," he said with absolute certainty. Well, I didn't expect him to say that. I mean, I'd known for a long time that was his goal. I had warned Debbie several times that I believed her boss had evil intentions, but she said I was crazy. Hearing him express his desires so directly, so brazenly, was a surprise. He was an arrogant jerk, and now I definitely wanted to punch him in the face and wipe that smirk off his face. He paused, letting his words sink in, still smirking. He seemed to be enjoying my fear. I took a deep breath and forced myself not to react. I knew he wanted me to be shocked or angry, to protest or make a scene so he could humiliate me even more than he already had. Years of playing poker in the garage had taught me to hide my feelings well. He watched me closely, as if trying to catch some sign, some nervous tick that would give me away. Instead of reacting the way he expected, I smiled. "Really?" I asked. "You sound very confident." "I'm always confident, Michael," he replied, grinning back at me. I'd never seen anyone grin and smile at the same time, but this jerk was doing just that. "I'm going to please Debbie as much as I want, when I want, and there's nothing you can do about it." I felt like a superhero from a comic book standing in front of a villain in a costume. You know, the kind of villain who is so confident that he has to give a speech revealing his evil plan to laugh at the good guy and enjoy his false sense of superiority. I read a lot of comic books as a kid. Okay, I admit it, I still read them, even though I'm a grown man. All those long-winded jerks were narcissists with inflated egos and a strong sense of entitlement, just like this asshole sitting across from me. "You can try to stop this," he continued his speech, "but at this point it's inevitable. You're in a hopeless situation. You're playing a game you don't understand against a master. If you try to warn her, she won't believe you. The more you protest and pull her away from me, the more she'll resist, and the faster she'll end up in my bed." I felt rage building inside me and had to focus on my breathing to keep from blushing. I couldn't believe the audacity of this jerk. All my life I'd hated jerks like him, bullies, spoiled rich kids. It made me sick that he was so sure Debbie would let him have her. I couldn't imagine her ever cheating on me, especially with this jerk. But then again, stranger things had happened. Even 3 aces don't always win. "You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you don't, I'll take her and make her mine. She'll probably hide it from you, trying to protect your feelings and save your pathetic marriage, but she'll be sleeping with me behind your back. If you resist the inevitable, she'll turn against you, and not only will I sleep with her, but you'll lose her forever. If you resist me, I'll ruin your lives, after I sleep with her anyway." I was boiling inside. My left hand was on the table and my right hand was on my knee, hidden from his view. I clenched it into a fist, ready to strike. "Did you rehearse that speech just for me? Or have you said it to a bunch of other poor suckers before me?" I asked, still smiling. I noticed a slight twitch in his left eye. I wasn't reacting the way he wanted me to, and he was starting to get angry. It was obvious. I had hit a nerve. "Your wife is in love with me. She respects me. Hell, she might even be in love with me. She's practically given herself to me. I could have slept with her already, but I'm playing the slow game. I want to be sure that when I make my move, she'll be completely under my control. Why her? I asked. Well, it's not because of her looks. She's not what you would call a beauty. She's far from my usual standards. Of course, I've improved her, made her wear sexy clothes to the office, sent her to the best stylists in town, and hired her a personal trainer. I wondered how we were paying for all this. My wife told me that it was a perk of being an executive at her level. I also had a hard time understanding why he wanted to sleep with my wife if he didn't find her attractive. I could have much younger and sexier women if I wanted to, he explained. But after a while, it gets boring. It's all about the domination. I like taking happy married women who love their husbands and making them cheat on their spouses and willingly submit to me. It's much more satisfying than fooling around with some empty-headed bimbo. And why are you telling me this? I asked in an even, emotionless voice. I want you to understand exactly what's going to happen and what your wife will be doing. I want you to wonder every night when she comes home if I slept with her. I want you to lose your masculinity by letting me have her and doing nothing about it. This bastard was a sick psycho. Does that turn you on? I asked with a slight chuckle. It's not enough for you to sleep with another man's wife. You have to cheat on him, humiliate him openly, and rub it in his face. The smirk disappeared, and his face turned red. I felt satisfied. I'll enjoy your wife more than the others, he said with a smirk, betraying what I had noticed immediately. I'll definitely sleep with Debbie. I'll send her home to you like this. You might want to buy some stronger mouthwash. I stared at him. I was on the verge of losing my composure and jumping across the table. He must have noticed my reaction because the smirk returned to his face. He laughed. I've slept with every woman in my state, and their husbands know about it. A few men have tried to fight me, but they lost, and I did it anyway. Like I said, it's inevitable. I knew that this sick bastard wanted me to explode. It would fuel his twisted perversion, and I was determined not to help him get his pleasure. What's to stop me from going to your wife or her father? I asked, looking for a way out. I didn't know much about his company, but I learned that he had married the owner's daughter many years ago and took over the company when the old man had a stroke. He laughed. Why would they believe the husband of a disgruntled former employee? This isn't the first time people have tried to extort money from me with lies and unprovable accusations. Former employee? I asked. She still works for you. Not if you don't cooperate. I'll fire her for cause and make sure Debbie never works in this industry again. You don't want to mess with me. Agree, and she'll get a nice severance package. Resist, and I'll fire her anyway and throw her out on the street. Like I said, you don't stand a chance. The best you can do is accept the inevitable, ignore it, and try to live with the knowledge that when she's not with you, she's with a real man. At that moment, I saw our wives returning from the ladies' room. He noticed my glance and saw them too. Be a gentleman and keep this conversation between us, Michael. Think about it carefully. Like I said, I'm going to be with her, no matter what you do. You need to decide how much your marriage means to you. The smirk disappeared, and he smiled broadly and warmly. He stood up like the gentleman he wasn't. I stood up too, just as the ladies returned to the table. Debbie smiled nervously at me, squeezing my hand slightly, then sat down again between her boss and me, much closer to that jerk than I would have liked. I glanced at him, and he quickly grinned at me, then winked, hinting at a hidden meaning. Did you boys have a nice chat while we were gone? Debbie asked, adjusting her little black dress. Her boss put his arm around Debbie's shoulders, and his wife sipped her cocktail, seemingly oblivious to the attention her husband was paying my wife. Yes, the jerk replied. I was telling Michael about some of our plans for the future and how our success is inevitable. Debbie didn't react to his hand, which made me feel even more uncomfortable. It was as if she was so used to the physical intimacy implied by his touch that she didn't even notice when he did it in front of his wife and me. I had to do something. I couldn't let Debbie give herself to some man, especially him. I decided to take a chance. I hoped that things between my wife and me hadn't gone so far that I would push her into his arms. However, at that moment, I had no other choice. Debbie would have to choose between him and me. I was prepared to accept the consequences of whatever she decided. "Yes," I said, smiling at Debbie. "If everything goes as your boss explained, you may have to change jobs soon, and I suspect you'll have to work a lot in the evenings and on weekends." Debbie looked at her boss, then at me with a puzzled expression. "Oh? Why?" she asked. Her boss said I considered myself a straightforward person. He had no idea how straightforward. When he hesitated to answer, I made up my mind. "Well, it looks like you'll be spending more time with him because he's going to turn you into a paid idiot." Her boss nearly choked on his tape. Debbie's mouth fell open. Her boss's wife gasped. "What did you say?" Her boss took his hand off Debbie's shoulder and stammered. "How dare you say that?" "Well, I'm just repeating what you said 5 minutes ago," I replied. "You said you were going to sleep with my wife, and there was nothing I could do to stop you." Her boss jumped to his feet. "You bastard!" he shouted. "How dare you? I've always been a gentleman to your wife. What game are you playing?" He stared at Debbie with feigned indignation. Debbie looked at me in shock, as if I had lost my mind. "Debbie, I would never lie to you or do anything to hurt you. That's exactly what I warned you this bastard was trying to do. You can leave with me right now or stay here with this jerk. If you decide to stay, then he's right, and you're his whore. In that case, don't bother coming home. I'm not going to be a cuckold." "Michael, this is crazy!" Debbie exclaimed. "That's not true." "You better leave, Michael," her boss said. "Debbie doesn't deserve this. You're jealous of her success and trying to ruin her career." Everything seemed to freeze, as if time had stopped. No one moved. No one spoke. I pulled the digital voice recorder I always carried with me out of my pocket. I was a writer and used it to record ideas that came to me during the day or to conduct interviews. I pressed the button, and his voice came out loud and clear so that everyone could hear. "Debbie will be mine when I want her, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." His boss's wife turned to him, pouring out her anger. "Again? You traitor! You swore you wouldn't do this again!" Debbie's eyes widened, and tears began to well up. I pressed the button, and the recorder continued recording. I heard him tell me that he would ruin Debbie's career if I didn't play by his rules, and that he would sleep with her anyway and then dump her. "You're a pathetic loser!" he yelled. Debbie began to shake her head. No, that's not true. Michael," she said, choking, then turned to her boss. "Michael isn't pathetic. He's not jealous of my success, and he's not a loser." "All women?" her boss's wife asked. "You've had all the women who work for you?" Her boss stepped back, staring at his wife. "Of course not," he said, taking a defensive stance. "He's doing this to attack me, to blackmail us." "You bastard!" his wife shouted. "When I tell Dad, you're finished." She grabbed her purse and ran out of the restaurant. "I believed you respected me for my work," Debbie growled. "You bastard! That's why you made me work with you alone all these evenings. That's why you offered to be my mentor. You bastard! You tried to seduce me!" Debbie grabbed a glass of wine and poured its contents over her boss's face, splashing him with the dark red liquid. "I'm leaving, damn it!" she shouted, then left, grabbing my arm. "Let's get out of here, Michael, before I throw up." "Sure, baby," I said, then turned around one last time and caught her boss's gaze. He was looking at me with hatred. "How do you like that?" I asked, returning the smirk he had been giving me all evening. I always believed that marriage was about love, trust, and a desire to preserve the relationship. I believed that when I married Grace 7 years ago. I wasn't a perfect person, but I was faithful. I worked hard, made sure all the bills were paid on time, and tried to put her needs before my own. But over the years, something changed. It happened so gradually that I didn't even notice at first. She stopped greeting me at the door when I came home. She no longer sent me little messages throughout the day like she used to. I thought maybe she was tired from work or stressed out. But then, even at home, I felt invisible to her. She didn't look at me and hardly spoke. Our evenings, which used to be warm and filled with conversation, became quiet. She would just sit on the couch staring at her phone or go to bed early. The closeness that once bound us together disappeared like a candle extinguished in an instant. I tried to remain calm. I asked her several times if everything was okay, but she kept her eyes on her phone and replied with the same lifeless, "Yes, everything's fine." Deep down, I knew that neither of us was okay. I noticed that I was always the one who made the first move. If I didn't text her first, the day would go by without a single word from her. If I didn't hug or kiss her, she didn't show any signs of affection. If I didn't plan a date, it didn't happen. I kept telling myself that it was temporary, that maybe she was under pressure. But in the end, I had to admit the truth. People make time for what's important to them. I was no longer on that list. Whenever I suggested something to bring us closer together, she found an excuse. A headache, tiredness, maybe another time. But another time never came. One Friday, I decided to do something special. I left work early, stopped by the store, and bought the ingredients for her favorite dinner: pasta with homemade sauce, garlic bread, and a bottle of good wine. I wanted to remind her of how things used to be. I set the table, dimmed the lights, and lit a few candles, just like we did when we were newlyweds. I was excited and hoped that tonight would be different. She came in around 7 p.m., threw her bag on a chair, and I greeted her with a smile. She barely glanced at me before quickly replying, "Hi." Her gaze fell on the table and the dinner I had spent hours preparing. No smile, no sign of gratitude. Instead, she muttered, "I already ate." My heart sank and I quietly repeated her words. "You already ate?" "Yes, I had a snack with the girls after work," she said, taking off her shoes. She walked straight to the couch, sat down, and without a word, took out her phone. I just sat there looking at her, hoping she would notice my disappointment, hoping she would appreciate my efforts. But she continued scrolling through her screen, her face lit up by the light of her phone, completely detached from me and the dinner I had prepared for her. Finally, after sitting in silence for a while, I spoke. "Grace." She didn't look up. "Are we okay?" She exhaled irritably, as if I were wasting her time. "Justin, why do you keep asking me that?" "Because we don't talk anymore," I said. "You don't even look at me the way you used to." She rolled her eyes. "I'm just tired. It's not that important." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was really just tired. But deep down, I knew the truth. She wasn't tired. She just didn't care. For weeks, I told myself that I was overthinking things, that all marriages go through phases like this. But I felt like I was living with a stranger. She wasn't the wife I used to know. She was just someone who happened to live in the same house as me and treated me like an invisible roommate rather than her partner. Then came the night when everything changed. We had dinner together. That is, I ate while she picked at her plate and scrolled through her phone. After dinner, I cleared the table, which she had always helped with before. When I returned to the living room, she was sitting hunched over on the couch, still glued to her phone, her expression blank, illuminated by the screen. I stood there looking at her, feeling a heavy emptiness in my chest. I walked over and sat down next to her. "Grace, we need to talk." Without looking up, she replied, "About what?" "About us. About this distance between us." She sighed and finally put her phone down. There was no sadness or fear in her eyes, only boredom. Justin, I don't know what you want from me. I want my wife back, I said, feeling anger and grief mingling in my chest. She snorted contemptuously and crossed her arms. I never left. Then why do I feel like I'm married to a ghost? We haven't been close for months. You barely touch me, barely talk to me. You act like you can't stand me. Rolling her eyes again, she said, I told you I'm tired. Can't you just accept that? You're always tired, I said, raising my voice despite my attempts to remain calm. That's all I ever hear from you, but all I see are your excuses to avoid me. She shook her head in exasperation. Oh, so now you're telling me how I feel. If I want to, I will. If I don't, I won't. It's that simple. And then she said it, the words that broke something inside me. What I do with my body is none of your business. I felt like she had hit me. I stared at her, stunned. What? I whispered. Leaning back on the couch, her arms still crossed, she said, Just because we're married doesn't mean I owe you anything. Something inside me broke. I wasn't asking for something I wasn't ready to give. I wasn't demanding. I was begging her for intimacy. Grace, I said quietly, this isn't about obligations. It's about love. About intimacy with the person you married. She laughed dryly. You're so dramatic. It's not all about you, Justin. A cold, suffocating silence fell between us. That was it. At that moment, I knew it was really over. I knew I was the only one still holding on, and that I had finally given up. I looked at her, really looked at her, at this woman I once loved, the woman I had built my whole life around, and all I saw was a person who had let me go long ago. For months, I had begged for crumbs of love. I had made excuses for her coldness. I convinced myself that if I tried harder, waited longer, she would come back to me. But in that moment, I saw the truth clearly. She wasn't coming back because she was already gone. She had left our marriage long before that conversation, just waiting for me to realize it. And now, I finally did. Something had changed in me. It was as if a weight I had been carrying around for years had suddenly disappeared. I felt no anger, no heartbreak. I wasn't even sad anymore. I was just done. I stood up. Okay, I said. Grace frowned. What does that mean? She asked. I walked over to the chair, picked up my jacket, and put it on. It means I hear you, loud and clear. She let out a dry, almost mocking laugh. So, are you leaving? She asked. I looked at her one last time, at this woman who had once been my whole world. Yes, I'm leaving. I didn't yell or slam the door. There was no dramatic exit. I just walked out and felt free for the first time in many years. That night, I checked into a hotel because I didn't know where else to go. My hands were shaking as I handed my credit card to the clerk at the front desk. My mind was racing with thoughts about what had just happened. I sat down on the edge of the hard hotel bed, stared at the wall, and waited for regret, sadness, or anger to wash over me. But none of that happened. I felt only exhaustion. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't fighting anymore. I thought about writing to Grace. Part of me hoped she would contact me first, ask where I was, at least pretend she cared. But hours passed and my phone remained silent. A whole day went by, then another. Nothing. Then I realized I had done the right thing by leaving. She wasn't worried or heartbroken. She wasn't even interested in where I had gone. She had become so used to me always being around, always running after her, that she assumed I would come back, as I always had. But this time, I wasn't coming back. About a week later, she finally wrote to me. Are you really leaving because of this? Grow up. I reread that message over and over, waiting for it to evoke some emotion in me. But I felt nothing. That was enough. The next day, I filed for divorce. At first, she didn't take it seriously. She believed I was bluffing, just trying to scare her. But then the papers arrived, and she realized it was no longer a game. Then the calls and messages started. Her late-night voice messages were full of tears. "Justin, please. I didn't mean it. I'll change. We can fix this. You can't just walk out on me like this." But the truth was, I wasn't walking out on anything. She was the one who walked out, a long time ago. She kept begging me to change my mind. At first it was text messages and voicemails, then she started calling more often, showing up at places I frequented, near my office, near my gym. Finally, she found out where I had moved and showed up at my apartment, knocking on my door late at night. Her voice was trembling with desperation, so different from the cold indifference she had shown me before. "Justin, please. I know I messed up, but I can change. We can fix this." I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I had already given her every chance when it mattered. She promised things would be different, but love isn't about promises. Love is what you do. Her actions had already shown me where I stood in her life. I wasn't her husband. I was just someone she thought would always be there, no matter how little she gave in return. So I let her go. I gradually moved on. Some nights were harder than others. Sometimes I found myself reaching for my phone to call her and fall back into old habits. But then I remembered how she looked at me that evening on the couch with a completely impassive face when she said, "What I do with my body is none of your business." You don't say that to someone you love. You say that when you stop caring. A few months later, the divorce was final. Signing the papers was unreal. I believed I would feel regret or a sense of loss. But when I put down the pen and pushed the papers across the table, I felt only relief. I was free. With that chapter closed, I began to rebuild my life. I focused on work, spent time with friends, and returned to old hobbies that I had neglected during my marriage. Then I met a new woman. Her name was Maria. She was everything Grace was not. Grace was cold and distant, while Maria was warm and attentive. Grace ignored me, but Maria made me feel seen. We met by chance, but our conversations turned into dates. And the dates turned into something I hadn't felt in years: happiness. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just existing. I was truly living. Then one evening, there was a knock on my door. It was just after 8. I hesitated to answer, thinking it was a neighbor or a delivery person. But when I opened the door, there she was, Grace. Her hair was tousled, her eyes puffy and red from crying. She looked smaller, as if the confidence that had once been her armor had disappeared. "Justin," she whispered. Behind me in the living room, Maria stood watching the door. Grace looked from me to her, her face contorted. "Who the hell is she?" she demanded sharply. I sighed, tired of everything that could happen. "This is Maria, my girlfriend." Grace opened her mouth but said nothing, then laughed bitterly and without humor. "Wow," she said mockingly. "You found someone new so quickly, huh?" "Why are you here, Grace?" I asked, losing my patience. She ran her hand through her hair, and her face changed. The anger was replaced by something softer, more broken. "I tried to date other people, Justin," she said quietly. "I tried to move on, but nothing worked. Now I realize you were the only one. You always were." I swallowed, feeling a strange mixture of pity and disappointment. But love? Number? That feeling died the night she told me my feelings didn't matter. "It's too late, Grace," I said calmly. "I begged you to care about me when it mattered. I fought for us, and you didn't. Now you want me back because you're lonely? Because your relationship didn't work out?" Her face contorted with anger. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," she said sharply, "after everything we've been through." "No, Grace," I said firmly, "after everything I've been through." She stood there breathing heavily, her fists clenched. "Do you believe she's different?" she asked contemptuously, nodding toward Maria. "She'll leave you too. just like I did, just like all of them. Maria didn't even flinch. She reached out and took my hand, standing beside me. Grace slumped. She expected me to forgive her. She expected to see the old me, the one who always forgave, who always stayed. But that person was gone. "It's over, Grace," I finally said. "Don't come back here." She stood there for a moment, as if she wanted to say something, but she didn't. Then she turned and walked away. I closed the door behind her and locked it. Maria squeezed my hand. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. I turned to her and smiled for the first time in a long, long time. "Yes," I said. "I'm really okay." And I meant every word.